one of the most weird effects of the theory of relativity is that of time dilation, how time measures different in different observers. And another one is that of space contraction, how distances in space are different for different observers. And this all happens because everything is essentially measured according to the speed of light, which is the same for all observers. Now, let me back up a bit, because our goal here is not to just talk about relativity, but to see relativity as actually a theory of communication that's being applied, and how we can a bit like transform our ideas around it to think about in terms of psychology and human communication. Okay? Let's do it. So to do that, let's go a bit, start from a bit earlier. You see, in everyday life, in the everyday world, let me have some water. In the everyday world, if I sit on the side of the road and the car passes with 100 kilometers per hour, the car moves for me 100 kilometers per hour. If another car passes in front of me with 20 kilometers per hour, the car moves with 20 kilometers per hour. So here is the thing. For the car that moves with 20 kilometers per hour, the car that moves with 100 moves with 80, because we have to subtract 100 minus 8, 20 equals 80. This means that speeds are relative. And because speeds are relative, all the cars and all me sitting and all people in the cars, we measure the same distances in space and time, the intervals. So 1 second is 1 second for all of us. Now, here's the interesting thing. We have actually found in nature that the speed of light doesn't work like that. We have found in nature that the speed of light actually is the same for all cars. So it's the same for me. It's the same for the car that goes with 20 kilometers per hour, with a car that goes 100 kilometers per hour. It's the same for a supersonic plane. It's the same for a high-speed train. It's the same for a spaceship. For the planets, the stars, everywhere. Doesn't matter the speed with which you move, the speed of light is the same for everyone. And this we have measured. And this, of course, is interesting because the information that's being communicated to us about the world comes with the speed of light, comes through light. How do we know that a car that's moving is first in this point, then in this point, then in the other point? We know it because the photons arrive to us from the car. And that's how we measure really where the car is. And if the speed of these photons is absolute, that practically means that our measurements in space and time have to change. So then measurements in time are different for different observers, different cars, and measurements in space are different for different observers. So initially we had speed being relative and measurements in space and time being absolute. And now we have the opposite. We have the speed of light, which communicates to us information, being absolute. And as a result, intervals, measurements of space intervals and time intervals are different between different observers, between different cars, between people who move with different speeds. And that's the thing, we have already arrived to the point where we see that special relativity is actually a theory of communication, because there is a universal communication component, the light, which moves with the same speed for everyone in the universe, this means that how I see the world and how I think that someone else is the world is completely different. But because we have a universal principle, we can make these translations and understand that what I measure as a specific time interval for a person, for them, it's another time interval. And it's the same in human communication. If we have some universal principles that we agree on, some, let's say, ethics, some norms, then we can translate that what we perceive for another person perhaps is not what we perceive, perhaps is something different for them. And if we get to know them, we can translate our feelings and what we perceive of them to what they really mean. To a degree, at some point, we do this automatically when we know someone really well. You see how we went from a theory of nature to human psychology and communication, right? So here is another interesting thing now. Now things are going to get weird. I want you to show you the opposite now. How when we hold to our own beliefs, our personal beliefs as absolute, communication fails. And I want us to see that through the example of special relativity by just twisting the theory, if we can call it like that. So imagine that there is not one universal speed, but several of them. So, there is the speed of light, let's say, that's hypothetical, it's not true, okay? But let's make a hypothesis here, that the speed of light is one speed that's universal for all people who measure it, and the speed of sound is the same. And perhaps we can also add the speed of bees, or the speed of flamingos, for that matter, or the speed of sardines and sharks, if this makes sense. So for every speed that we consider universal, we would end up with different measurements of time intervals. So we wouldn't know which then time interval to choose unless we know the speed according to which we have to translate it, right? Because if someone is traveling with the speed of the speed of bees or the speed of flamingos, and if we measure with the speed of flamingos, we would need to do different transformations than if we measure with the speed of bees. And we would need to do different transformations if we measure with the speed of light. That's the thing. So things would get really weird, because then we don't have a universal speed. We would have to make certain that the speed with which we translate things, the speed we use to translate things, is the speed the other person uses to translate things. If we wanted to communicate and understand each other. So if someone measures intervals in their system with the speed of flamingos, and we do the transformations with the speed of putting there the speed of light, we wouldn't understand what they mean, how they measure things, how they mean them. There would be total miscommunication, and it would be total chaos. And now imagine something even more weird. Imagine that each observer, each person, has their own speed, which they consider universal. So let's imagine that I measure as universal and consider universal the speed of flamingos. And Peter considers universal the speed of bees, and George considers as universal the speed of sardines. And we have no idea about these different speeds, and we all translate what the others say to us according to our own speeds, according to our own beliefs, the speed of our own beliefs. We held our own beliefs as absolute, and we try to make sense of what they say. We try to understand, and we make conclusions. We run ahead and make conclusions according to the speed we believe they communicate with, and don't even pay attention to the idea they may be communicating with a different speed. Then, of course, there would be huge misunderstandings, and we would be unhappy and angry with each other. And this would make no sense at all, would it? But how many times in life we find ourselves in places, in positions like that, where later we realize that we had different assumptions in the back of our heads we weren't even aware of. And we were making expectations and assumptions of what other people mean. Sometimes we may think they mean something positive when they mean something negative, but more often than not, we think someone may mean something negative for us, where for them it may be neutral or they don't give significance to it. Because we were not aware of the speed of beliefs with which we translate other people's intention, words, and communication. And that's why it's important to have good communication and understand how to communicate in a way that reduces that, and understand how our own self-awareness can make us aware of our own assumptions. So we remove them. So we reduce the margin of possible random speech when we try to effectively communicate with people. And then we can also rediscover them when we want to go to our own daydream and creativity and find our own unique world in our minds. And doing this back and forth between a universal speed of communication that makes sense and all the pluralism and chaos of different things we can put in our mind, as long as we are aware of them, and enrich our lives instead of causing miscommunication, misunderstandings, and hard feelings, which really don't serve anyone. So that's what space-time distortions and the speed of belief are about, and seeing special relativity as a theory of communication being transferred to human psychology and communication.